All right, so thanks for joining me and us in Texas Rising for another Civics training. At the top of the call, before we get started, I want to introduce, the people on my team who are so awesome and really instrumental to this project. So that is Scott, our field manager. He'll be chiming in. Hi, Scott. And then Isabella, our campus organizer in San Antonio, San Marcos. She'll be chiming in. So I'm going to begin now, and I'm going to begin by saying that I'm really fortunate to occupy everyone's time today and this space and share out things that I've learned as a person in a community that I'm learning all the time, and as someone who cares a lot about equity and liberation. And I want to say that workers' rights is an issue that is, new and outside the wheelhouse of Texas Rising as an org. But the place where we've plugged in the past have been around paid sick leave, which we'll definitely be talking about. But I want to be upfront that this is going to be very much a primer, a glimpse into this very deep and complex, multifaceted issue. And also say how thankful I am to the organizations that lead here, that taught me so much and contributed to my understanding and to the success here today. And those are Workers Defense Project and the AFL-CIO. Cool. Now I'm gonna lay out the framework a little bit more of our around our training. So there are a lot of points of connection that need to be made for the success of any fight toward equity. And I'll start that attempt here, and I'm going to try to have this woven through everything that we do today. And just start by saying that right now, the state of Texas, along with everywhere, a lot of cities all over the country are rising up and demanding the long overdue reckoning of racial injustice and murderous police in our communities. In response, police departments we've seen have flooded the streets outfitted from head to toe in riot gear, severely tactical training, wooden projectiles, tear gas, canisters, and other means of complete violence and destruction. And we can contrast this to the gear and protection that our essential frontline workers received as the coronavirus continues to sweep the entire world and has taken over 100,000 lives. Healthcare workers wearing garbage bags and unsafely reusing masks, not having access to the right equipment, the right masks, and putting their lives even more at risk because they do not have enough protective equipment. So how is it that the richest country in the world how is it that, living here, neither our supply chains nor our federal government nor our our local public health budgets could not provide such basic measures of protection. Yet we have the most bloated police budgets across our country, locked and loaded, ready to go for police to terrorize our communities, resulting in death after death after death of yet another unarmed Black person. What I'm really trying to lay out and to speak to is really trying to connect these two with regards to funding, how our systems prioritize, or how our systems don't. So here is our agenda for today. We're gonna talk about how Texas Rising thinks workers should be empowered. We're gonna have a brief history of workers fighting in Texas for better conditions. We'll take a look at the modern fight for paid sick leave, where that lives right now. And then we'll have a guest, Representative Diego Bernal of District 123, regional police budget overview, and then we'll lay out our next steps. Cool. Okay, so the best analogy I've seen, put all of this into words with regard to coronavirus, on how bad things are and how much worse COVID has exposed this injustice, is this analogy of like the virus being a black light on a motel room, really exposing the grind, the insufficiencies on something that really wasn't that great to begin with. That's why our statement on the way forward to worker empowerment has two sets of demands. And I'm going to let Scott read those out now and further outline it.
Yeah, so so I'm going to be going a bit more in depth about Texas Rising's demands to help empower workers. So first off, I just want to emphasize that this is just a starting point for workers' rights in Texas, because we kind of have a really long way to go as a state. Even though Texas has the second largest economy in the United States, we're one of the worst states for workers' rights. So that's why Texas Rising and the Texas Freedom Network believe that all Texan workers, no matter their race, status, sexual orientation, profession, legal status, education level, you name it, deserve the full and undivided support of their state government, so that everyone can lead their most healthy, equitable, and financially secure lives. So we've kind of divided our demands into two sets. The first set are longer-term measures that we believe are crucial to empowering working Texans. So these include adjusting and raising the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour to reflect the true cost of living and give everyone a living wage. The next is require that all businesses provide a paid sick leave for their workers. No one should have to choose between their health and a paycheck. We've seen this problem in action throughout the years, but as Lexi said with the analogy about the black light in the motel room, we've really seen it come out during this pandemic. And the last long-term kind of demand we're making at this moment is that municipal budgets reflect and fully fund the public works projects, arts and culture, elections departments, quality of life, and public health. It's time we invest in our workers so that they can enjoy the fruits of their labor. But Texas has failed to pass these strong and sweeping policies that empower and uplift workers, before the pandemic and during. So we're faced with a population who must put themselves at risk. That's why our second set of demands call for an immediate action in the face of this global pandemic so that Texans can rise up and be as successful as they can be. So some of these measures include increased access to necessary personal protective equipment, including sanitizing equipment for all workers, hazard pay with a presumption that if an employee were to contract COVID-19, that they would be eligible to file for workers' compensation. And the last one is immediately enacting a mandate private essential businesses provide paid sick leave for their workers. So again, these are just kind of starting points for workers' rights in the state, but we believe these to be some of the most important first steps we can take in our advocacy. I'll now pass it back to Lexi so we can move on with the presentation.
All right. Thanks, Scott. I'm not on mute, right? Okay, no. Great. So before we move forward, I want to gauge how informed we are as a group as we come to this next part, the history of workers organizing for better conditions. So everyone who's willing and able, if you can drop your response to this question on a scale of 1 to 5. So in Texas, our social and political climate is very business friendly. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being you don't know much about it, and 5 being, you know all of it, how familiar are you with the history of workers organizing to improve their conditions in our state? Let's see, I'm gonna take a look at the chat. Okay, cool, this is very helpful. Thanks for sharing that, guys. Very useful as we go through the rest of our thing too, cool. So I'm gonna pass it to Isabella now. She is going to walk us through the early days of labor organizing in Texas. Let's take a look at that.
All right, thank you, Lexi. So Texas has, as we've been saying, a very rich history when it comes to the fight for workers' rights. So we're gonna go through some key moments, talk about a few big figures and groups, and then end on where we're at today. So let's start all the way back in 1838. This is when the first strike in Texas happened. It was by the Texas Typographical Association. This was a victory. It resulted in a 25% wage increase for those workers who striked and fought for that. So then in the 1880s, we saw some key actions by the Knights of Labor. That's one of the first major labor organizations in the US. They had their first local assemblies in Texas in 1882. In 1885, they saw a victory in their strike against the Wabash Railroad, who had fired Knights of Labor workers. However, a year later in 1886, they had a loss in the strike against Great Southwest strike against Gold's Texas and Pacific Railroad due to Gold hiring outside workers, which kind of negated the strike they were taking because he just replaced them. And he also brought in outside military assistance against those upset workers who were fired. So then we have in 1900, the Texas State Federation of Labor's founding. They actually disbanded in 57 to merge with Texas State Council of Industrial Organizations to form AFL-CIO, which most of us know today as a big labor organization. So in 1938, we saw another major fight in San Antonio, the pecan sheller strike. Yes, Rick. This was a victory that occurred when more than 10,000, mostly Latinx laborers walked off the job to protest low and discriminatory wages that favored white workers over Mexican American workers. This strike has also prompted the ACLU to enter Texas. So this action was led primarily by a woman named Emma Tanayuka, and I'm going to pause to talk about her in particular a little more now. So Emma Tanayuka was a Mexican organizer from San Antonio who worked with unemployed councils and the Workers Alliance of the Mexican American community, organized for better workers' rights against racial injustice by the U.S. Immigration Service. In 1938, that strike that she and others put on, as I just said, sought to end, yes, Victoria, it sought to end that race-based wage discrimination, and it was a victory. She was also a communist who joined the party to serve as a voice for Mexicans who she felt were very often left out of the conversation. But her party affiliation led to people discounting her and her actions, such as the 1938 pecan sheller strike, unfortunately. Okay. So back to our timeline. It's a little bit more modern now. 1966 in South Texas, watermelon workers marched 400 miles to protest low wages and poor working conditions. Again, this was a loss as basement workers are brought in, much like the strike I mentioned earlier. But later on, we saw some new actions come as a result of this. Organizer Antonio Orendane and farm worker leaders from the Rio Grande Valley went on to form the Texas Farm Workers Union in 1975 because they disagreed with the United Farm Workers over how that strike was handled. However, this union ended up failing due to, they just couldn't work independently of that larger union. So then we have from 1972 to 1974, the Ferris strike. This occurred when the Fair Manufacturing Company, which was started in San Antonio, and the strike was mostly comprised of, again, Chicana employees. Sylvia and Trevino led them on a strike so they could demand the formation of a labor union and better working conditions. So this two-year strike included almost 4,000 people, again, mostly women, mostly Chicanas, and it was a victory for the workers. They ended up adopting a union contract as a result. So next we have in 1985, SFA, which is in Nacogdoches, they deunionized, go back, yeah. They deunionized over 156 food service jobs. These workers are represented by the Communication Workers of America and Texas State Employees Union. So then in 1987, 3,000 marched in solidarity with those SFA workers, and it was called the Jobs of Justice movement. Where's Serena in here? We got our SFA peeps. Then the last one on this slide, in 1988, we had the formation of the Southwest Workers Union. It was founded in Hondo, Texas. And today, among all the things that they do, they have their living wage campaign, which aims to reestablish the dignity and value of workers in Texas. Next. All right, then we have 1990, Levi Strauss closed its San Antonio plant. Sorry, I was mispronouncing that a lot earlier. Cannot say a jean brand. When they closed their San Antonio plant and moved production to Costa Rica so that they could underpay those workers rather than pay workers here a fair wage. So in 1992, those employees protested after losing their jobs and being replaced. This led to the foundation of Fuerza Unida, a San Antonio-based workers activist group. While the lawsuit was lost, these actions by workers inspire better severance packages in the future as Levi Strauss continued this practice. So as you may have noticed by now, Rick just pointed out, a lot of these actions were conducted not only in South Texas and the Valley and San Antonio, but by Latinx workers and community organizers. So I wanted to touch more on organizations that value Latinx workers as well. Although I want to say these people are valuable regardless of the work that they put in, it doesn't matter. But so in 2000, the AFL-CIO Executive Council called for reform in the nation's immigration laws for undocumented workers. And then on February 16, 2016, maybe a lot of us remember this one, we had a Day Without Immigrants. It was a strike to highlight immigrants, who make up more than a fifth of the Texas labor force as of 2015, and a protest against Trump's border wall and deportation plans. In Austin, Texas, this closed down an estimated 80% of restaurants and construction sites in the city. Recently, we've seen similar efforts like Blackout Tuesday, which highlights Black business owners and workers that make our communities stronger. All right, last one. So let's end where we are now. As of 2019, Texas has over 497,000 union workers. However, many of our fights are not over. The 1993 Texas Minimum Wage Act, which establishes a minimum wage for non-exempt employees, has reflected $7.25 an hour as the minimum wage since 2009. That's over a decade. And it's not a living wage. As Scott mentioned, it needs to be at least $15, so we stand by. Texas is also a right to work state. And on paper, that means a person cannot be denied employment based off their membership or non-membership in a labor union or other labor organization. However, right to work policies actually undermine workers and unions in several ways. Because even those who opt out are still covered by a union, the union is receiving less dues and less memberships, which lessens their bargaining power. As a secondary effect, union members are more likely to vote. So whenever we reduce union membership, we are harming workers everywhere as they lose faith in the systems that are supposed to empower them. So that's where we are today. I'm going to pass it back to Lexi to touch on paid sick leave.
Cool, yeah, thank you so much, Isabella. Let's hop into paid sick leave now, which is a modern effort that's been taken up, and this is, as I said, where we have plugged in the past quite a bit. Paid sick leave is the concept that you accrue paid sick time off for a certain number of hours worked. It's a concept that every single other wealthy country in the world has for all of its citizens, except for us, of course, except for the United States. Right now, there are 11 states that have state-mandated and enforced paid sick leave laws. All right, there is Rick, me, and Isabella at a PSL action. So when we look at the benefits of paid sick leave, there are many, but the best case to be made for this benefit for all workers, unfortunately, came, with COVID-19. It made for us very clear. The way to stop the spread of coronavirus and all disease, like when you're just regularly sick with the flu or whatever, is to stay at home. But because having the luxury of paid sick leave or paid sick days is determined by, who your boss is, where you work, where you live, that leaves a lot of people out. Service workers, contractors, sanitation workers, freelance writers, a lot of people that I didn't name. But going back to that analogy, this was a crucial need for people even before COVID-19. People losing out on wages because they get sick has always meant that, they might not be able to pay rent, buy groceries. All right, so cities that have passed a paid sick leave ordinance are Austin, they did pass it, enacting is another thing. These cities are Austin, Dallas, and San Antonio. It's also the most movement. In each instance, the new proposed ordinance was met with really fierce resistance from local businesses, staffing agencies, and professional associations, basically people's bosses. What's more is the opposition was supported really fast and really early by none other than our good pal Ken Paxton, who took a really hard line stance that, you know, such ordinances violate the Texas Minimum Wage Act that Isabella went over. So Ken Paxton claimed that providing benefits outside of the set wage would violate, you know, this uniformity of rules set in this act. That's, yeah. So as we will see in our timelines, I'm going to go over, every city council voted for this ordinance, usually pretty overwhelmingly. Okay, there's Ray dropping off petition signatures at City Hall in San Antonio. I found this online, so I don't know the source. Just kind of floating out there. Okay. Here's the timeline for Dallas. This is the one I've you know, it's basically all other timelines followed what happened here, so I'm going to go over this one briefly, and this is the one I have the least action to, or connection to. So the city of Dallas's ordinance went into effect for employees August 2019. Lots of time passed, lots of lawsuits and challenges, and finally a federal judge in the Eastern District of Texas issued that injunction to block the city of Dallas's paid sick leave ordinance. It was supposed to be enforced April 2020. Arash, shout out to Arash working on that. Thank you. All right, so this is the one that I worked on, and a lot of the student leaders did so much even before I had this job, and I had to get up to speed and learn from them and understand where we were. So summer of 18, coalition of local activists collect signatures to require the city council to vote on a paid sick leave ordinance. The council did, it approved it August that same year. And then March through September 2016. Oh, why does it say that? Sorry, it's supposed to be March 29th through September 2019. There was an ad hoc committee that had a lot of organizers, city attorney, managers, and Metro Public Health working really deep in the details of how this ordinance would look to the public. And then in October, City Council approves this latest version, renames it, calls it Sick and Safe Leave. But it was blocked, or it was denied, delayed implementation through a temporary injunction from Judge Sakai. We also were defending this ordinance from preemption at the state ledge. Republican Representative Creighton had this like slew of really annoying bills that would block cities from implementing better benefits at the state legislature. And so that failed. That bill did fail. But yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more. What I'm trying to say is state government and congressional Republicans, along with business owners, are basically like, we're with you. We'll work together to make sure workers do not become empowered and have more benefits. The Austin fight for paid sick leave, this one had a really big champion, Greg Kassar on Austin City Council. He just brought this forward and they voted on it and it was a thing. The Third Court of Appeals, though, ordered that the earned sick time ordinance be postponed while they issue a ruling, August 2018, and it was intended to go in effect October, but it did not because that same Third Court ruling also applied to it. Lots of time passed, coronavirus happens, and they were like, hey, maybe we can retroactively make this a thing for our people because obviously we really need it. We tried to attempt it. That ruling came down very recently, just this month, and they stayed the ruling from the Third Court, and the ordinance did not move forward. They chose to do this in the middle of a pandemic. So that's where that is. And now we're right at the time, around 4:30. State Rep Diego Bernal should be joining us. So we will hold the line and see. See chat. Okay. Drop a 1 in the chat if you worked on a paid sick leave ordinance in your region ever. Michaela, yes, Rick, of course. All right, let's check the participants. I'm just gonna search. Let's see. He's not here yet. All right. Also, since I'm sharing my screen, can you guys see my chat box right now? Okay, just wondering. Hope he makes himself known whenever he does join. Okay, we've got a time estimate on Diego, and he was supposed to be here like at 4:30, so we are early. Okay. I guess be thinking right now of questions that you have for him. He is someone who, yes, thank you, Denise. He is someone who has worked, he represents an area of San Antonio and as well as others. He is someone who has prioritized working families at the legislature. He introduced a statewide paid sick leave bill, and I want to really hear from him how, like, because we have to fight for these things on so many different fronts, local and state, federal sometimes, but I want to hear like what he thinks his role is in navigating this. Like, where should our pressure points go? What does he have planned for next legislative session? Yeah, and we are going to have a Q&A with him. So let's think of some questions. Oh, he did sponsor the statewide pay. Yes. Does anyone live in his, or have they ever lived in his district? Oh, he's a DJ in his free time? Wow, that's powerful. That is powerful. Oh, we're at 49 participants. It's him. Okay. Yes. Cool. Club Rising. All right. Hi. Let's see. I can't see him. Where is he? Oh, hi. There he is. I'm going to unmute you if that's okay. Hello, Representative Diego Bernal. How are you? Oh. Can you try that again? Hello?
I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Sorry, sorry, it looked like your mouth is moving, but maybe not. Hi, welcome to our discussion on workers' rights in Texas. It's good to have you here. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was wondering if, so we just went over a lot of the history of the fight for people for people working to improve conditions here in Texas, and that labor fight on the ground, as well as the modern fight for paid sick leave, and went over the timeline of what that looked like. As the person who sponsored the statewide paid sick leave bill, can you talk about why it was important for you to prioritize working families, what this bill could mean right now for us in a global pandemic? Just what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. You can hear me okay, right?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh, I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate the very colorful logo with my name on it. I think it's twofold, and there's two reasons that I thought it was important. The first is it's the right thing to do. My family and I have our own experience with it. my mom and I, when we got to San Antonio from the Valley when I was 3, some people care about that detail. I got the chicken pox and she was working and we didn't have a car. She had to take the bus. And at a certain point, her job said, look, you've got to come back to work. And so she had to make a decision between staying home with me because I couldn't go to childcare because I was sick, or taking me to work with her. They didn't let her, so they fired her. And so I know exactly what that looks like. I know exactly what it looks like when someone's got to choose between their health or the health of someone they care about and a job. So it just made perfect sense to me. Locally, though, there was a group of organizers, the Texas Organizing Project, that had gone and solicited signatures from people to get paid sick leave on a ballot locally. And what the council did is they decided just to adopt it as opposed to put it for a vote. But then the legislature, of course, after Austin and San Antonio and Dallas, the gears started to turn, and what they do with the legislature is they try to eliminate any gains that a local government has made. It's just the way that they've been working recently. And so I also felt compelled to sort of take the voice of the people that I represent who've done all the work themselves, and as a community said, we want this, we think it's necessary. I thought it was important to sort of represent that. Say, okay, if you're going to take it away from us here, I'm going to at least take their voice to Austin. So part of it was symbolic, and I think that there's some of that we do. But part of it was it's the right thing to do. It makes a lot of sense. And obviously, I took the San Antonio ordinance and tried to turn it into a state law. It's not something I was an expert on. I think a lot of us find ourselves in a situation where we care about something, but we don't know it really well. I care about, and I want Medicaid expansion. If I had to explain the nuts and bolts of it, I would struggle with some of it. So those two things happening at the same time was helpful to me because I got to sit with the people who wrote it and understand the different pieces. Some of it didn't translate as well from the municipal code to the state code, so we had to fix that. But it's just, at the end of the day, people shouldn't have to make that choice, especially, as you said before, working families, people who are having a hard time making ends meet, people who live paycheck to paycheck. The idea that you are forced to make this sort of moral, ethical choice where you lose either way is problematic. So I thought it was worth a shot. It didn't go anywhere. And also, in all fairness, Representative Collier, I think, filed a similar bill. They might have been different here and there, but she also had a statewide paid sick leave bill. We presented them together in committee.
Cool. Thank you for that insight. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to see if there are any things in the chat to do a quick Q&A.
Sure.
But I know we only have you for about 4 more minutes.
No. I've got as much time as you guys need. It's fine.
Okay.
I'm not on daddy duty. There's nothing happening back here now, so it's fine.
All right. So what are some things that you're really prioritizing in the lead up to the next ledge session?
Well, honestly, I think that a lot of us are trying things that we've been trying for a long time, right? A lot of the ideas that we have, that all of you have, aren't new ideas. We've just had a sort of quarter century of not being able to get moving on them. So we got a good shot in the arm today from the Supreme Court. So I think you'll see more non-discrimination bills. I've always carried a statewide comprehensive one, and then we also strategically break it up into pieces. So I always carry the housing discrimination one. So I carry the housing discrimination one and the omnibus one.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see a lot of people, a lot of us, try to find a way to reopen the conversation on expanding Medicaid. I think you'll see us try to reopen the conversation on, and when I say reopen, it's because it's been shut every time. It's an open conversation. I think you'll see a lot of an effort to reopen the conversation on raising the minimum wage. I think you're going to see a lot of conversation on marijuana legislation. And then there's some things that happen that become issues of the moment, and then for whatever reason, they die down. And I always think that there's something really sad and wildly political about that bothers me. And one of those things for me is a few sessions ago, there were some cuts made to Medicaid that resulted in students or children with special needs, especially those who needed advanced therapy, losing those benefits to a tremendous degree. And that, I mean, if it's not a death sentence, it certainly was a tremendous reduction in the quality of life. And that was a big to-do that session. And then it kind of went away. To her credit, Representative Davis, a Republican, she tried to raise the issue again in its connection with MCOs before the beginning of last session. But at the end, we didn't get very far. And I think we need to keep hammering away on that, right? If we can't protect and serve the least among us, the most vulnerable among us, then, you know, what are we doing here, right? So I think you'll see a lot of that. But I also think that we've got 6 months to go. We can start filing bills in November. One of the really, honestly, humbling things for me, like I'm admitting this, is that watching all these young people in the streets, even in my hometown of San Antonio for the past, I think 12 or 13 days now, maybe because I entered a situation where I'm in the minority and I'm trying to do as much as I can, and I don't believe in the theater of politics. I really do believe in making policy changes so at the end of the session, people's lives are better in a measurable way. But one of the challenges that I've had, especially being in the minority in almost every way, is that you're taking pre-existing systems and you're trying to find ways to make them better, to serve better, to perform better, to produce better results. But it's not as if we're going back and reimagining systems and saying, this system just doesn't work. Let's think of a completely new way to do something, right?
Yeah.
That's the conversation you're having on the streets right now, which is people are being thoughtful and imaginative enough to say, maybe this entire system doesn't work. Why don't we replace it as opposed to tweak it endlessly? So I think that for a lot of us, we're sitting back and thinking, yeah, we're the minority. Maybe we won't be at the end of the election cycle in the House. Right. And even if we are, why don't we propose both? Why don't we think about being more aspirational than we have been? I think we've been very much trying to make things better, and I don't fault anybody for that, especially considering our numbers. But at the same time, it's been awesome to watch people reimagine something into something new. And there's a lesson, I think, for all of us in that.
Thank you. You hit a lot of the themes that we are trying to, for someone that didn't join at the beginning, you hit on the head a lot of the themes that I'm trying to bring to the forefront here. So thank you so much for those words. And I don't think anything has come up in the chat, but we can give it a couple moments. And going back to what you said around like not quite knowing everything, but really caring about it. Medicaid expansion is something that I wanted to include in this training. And I was like, oh man, it's so complex, but it's so important. And that Greg Abbott chose, never to even to take that expansion at no cost to him. Like it's so detrimental.
It's tough, but I think that, so we have a bill that expands Medicaid just for children, right? And we had to sort of teach ourselves, well, are we doing this for symbolic purposes, at which point we have no interest, or would it really make a difference? And if it does make a difference, how does that compare to what's offered in CHIP, right? So why do you need Medicaid expansion for kids if you've already got CHIP? It was a big conversation in the office. What we discovered is that Medicaid expansion just for kids actually covers special needs children in a way that CHIP is terrible at, right? So getting into the weeds is important. But at the same time, the reason why you need coalitions is not just because of size, but because people bring different areas of expertise to the table. And so you don't have to be an expert at every and all things. You have to find people that you trust, that you're humble enough to follow because you agree with the end goal. So I know Pub Ed really well. I don't know healthcare systems very well. I work off of that with other people. For example, Joe Moody and Jean Wu know criminal justice reform really well. I know some of it, but I have no problem following them. Celia Israel knows voting rights, which I know really well, but she knows voting rights in the ledge and transportation really well. I have no problem following her and supporting her and trusting her. So I wouldn't want people to feel the pressure of being subject matter experts in everything. I think the pressure is, do you have an ego that's malleable enough to put away and allow other people to lead on things that they know more about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then I'm going to go with this last question to close this Q&A out from Zachary. He says, can you help us understand how the Texas Minimum Wage Act might prevent individual municipalities from enacting their own paid sick leave policies?
Yeah, I mean, it's simple. It prohibits it. At this point, the city can't do it. You've got the state constitution saying you can't. You've got to change the constitution before you can even go locally and have that conversation, that either ordinance pass or election. And that's really unfortunate, because one of the things I want to leave you guys with, which I appreciate about you, is that, I'll just use my city as an example. And I'm not saying they're bad, and I'm not saying they should stop, but we are sort of overrun with programs and nonprofits that operate justly and rightfully so at the sort of ER triage level. But what we haven't done, and what I like about the legislature, but we need more of, is to think of these issues at scale, right? Because scale is the only way that we're going to really change the way that people's lives work. And I'm going to use my city as an example, and then I'll get out of your hair.
Okay.
So 2008 to 2018, San Antonio is the last, or first, depending on your perspective. We have the highest percent of people living in poverty, the highest percent of children living in poverty, and the highest percent of young children living in poverty. In the region, we are number one in all those things in the entire country. We've leapfrogged Detroit in those categories. When you talk about poverty to the business elite, they'll say, bring jobs, they'll bring greater wages, so on and so forth, property taxes, trickle-down economics. Same period of time, San Antonio's top 5 in job creation, top 5 in wage increases, and top 5 in gross municipal product. My point is that those two things happened at the same time. Dead last in these poverty indicators. It's literally a tale of two cities. There's no amount of nonprofit programs that are going to solve that problem. The only way to pivot out of that is doing things to scale. And that's something I just really want everyone here to think about, is to do things at scale. Because if we don't, then we're on a sort of policy treadmill. We're just sort of standing in place of preserving the status quo, but we're not really making change that people can feel in their day-to-day life, which is the appropriate measure.
Right. Well, you've left us with a lot to think about, and thank you so much. Everything that you said was very helpful in guiding the rest of our discussion.
Sure.
So thanks for being on. Feel free to stick around. Municipal police budgets now, and take a look where we're spending our money and where we're not. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm going to share my screen again now.
Good luck.
Okay, cool. We're back in it. So we've seen the struggle of organizers deciding their pressure points and choosing where to apply that at the state and the local level. Often these fights converge, and we have to fight it on two fronts, as he was saying. There are a lot of ways that we fail workers, and it's not hard to draw simple conclusions looking at this apex of circumstance we're in right now. We have to realize we're fighting two public health crises right now, both COVID-19 and murderous racist police. You know, these two things are killing people every day. And we're halfway through the year, meaning many municipalities have taken their usual evaluation at that mid-mark to see how the budget that they've created is meeting the needs of their cities. So obviously with the pandemic, emergency sessions have been had. I'm sure you've seen and heard them, maybe even organized around them, to have more funds allocated to testing, financial assistance, public health, all of these things. And a lot of cities have done that. But they haven't gone far enough, and not nearly. but it can obviously be done. We can obviously divest from things and invest in other things. The problem is all of this has been so reactive. City budgets could have been prioritizing public health, could have been having workers accruing paid sick time all before this hit. Now it's far too little and far too late. In light of the public health crisis that is COVID, we must certainly recognize the public health crisis that has been police brutality, and people's lives are lost at scale in both of these areas, and our budgets lay out our city's priorities. Now Scott's gonna quickly click through the budgets. A lot of places at Texas Rising is active, and try to demonstrate just how much we dedicate to policing our communities, where we could potentially be allocating a lot more to public health, public works, providing more benefits to working families, better jobs, and all over the improvement of what is around us. So, Scott?
Yeah. So before we get too far in this, I just want to say that, reallocating what community needs isn't, like
Hey, Scott?
end all be all. What?
Can you start over?
Well, I'll just skip right on. Oh, yeah. So before we get to into this, I just want to say that reallocating city budgets to reflect community needs is not the end all be all for the problems that plague our system. Starting this conversation on rebalancing the budgets and defunded police departments is just a first step that we want to advocate for. So let's go ahead and look at the numbers here. So starting off in San Antonio, they have a 400 for next we'll go to Austin, where they've allocated $1,003,913,260 for public safety. That is just a lot of money. Next, we'll go to El Paso. They've set aside $157 million for their police department. With if you look at the graph there, it shows only $6 million of that going for municipal court. Next, we'll go to Brownsville with a $32 million budget for their police force. Next, we'll go to Houston. They have a $5.1 billion city budget, and at 50%, that's around $900 million at the end of the day for policing in their budget. Next is Dallas with a $517 million police budget. And then finally, we get to San Marcos with just over $35 million set aside for their police.
Wow. Okay, that is a lot of money. That is a lot of priority being given to criminalization and fear and terror. This is just one way. There's so many other ways that your well-being, your safety, your security, and all of that is inseparably linked to the well-being, safety, and security to the most marginalized. Okay, so that's a lot of moving pieces because this is a very complex issue, but let's bring it home. We know that cases of coronavirus are skyrocketing because I just want to check the chat. Okay, not sure. Yes. Amazing. Thank you for the comments. Yeah, seeing those numbers really just gets you thinking, gets you feeling. We know that things are still getting worse with regards to cases of the coronavirus because our economy demands to take precedence over everything else, over health, over safety. And that our workers, firefighters, farm workers, public employees, plumbers, nurses, and doctors, these people are the ones who continue to do this work, take on this risk. We all know someone, we might be those people ourselves who are taking that on either out of economic need or because this is your job and this is what you do regularly. So can everyone drop a 1 in the chat if someone came to mind whenever I said that? I know for me, my family members, there's someone I know that and I love who is out there putting their life at risk. Cool. Okay, so again, so many are doing this because economic conditions, like they have no other choice. All right, so the first steps toward making sure our communities are prioritized and honoring those who make daily life possible is learning how to tell our stories. If we can share our unique perspectives through social media or through testimony at commissioner courts, at city council meetings, there's a chance we can really bring about some change. And I say this knowing that all regions are attacking, our community, the issues we see in our communities differently with different tactics. But this is something, creating your personal story on your behalf of yourself or someone you know and love is really step one. So we are tapping into some relational organizing and asking everyone to join us next Friday again to revisit this. And we're going to talk about how to craft that story. And Texas Rising will be collecting these to uplift the workers on social next week from our main account, as well as being able to walk away with something to use at future actions, all the ones that we posted, like the one that Fatima posted about in the chat. Other testimonies in our regions. And so details about this will come in a follow-up email with the registration link. And I really hope that we were able to share out useful information for everybody. And I thank you guys for your time and your attention. It was really good to be here and do this.